Hey guys, jumping right into this part of the chapter, emotion or reason, which comes first. For a very long time, man in his ignorance and arrogance has believed that human beings had the capacity to reason before reacting. It was thought that we were not instinctive like the lower animals, but reflective, rational beings. For the most part, this is true. And it is to be expected that we should think before we act. But sometimes, under certain circumstances, that doesn't seem to work. Why not? And how do we know this? Alright, pausing there. I think we're both, to be honest. I always say trust your instincts, trust your gut. You know, there's a reason that we have that phrase. It doesn't always work for everyone, right? Just because you trust your gut doesn't mean that you can't also, um, what is it? Be reflective at the same time. So, just my thought. All right, continuing on. With the invention of more and more refined imaging techniques, which can be used to study the brain and its functions, neurobiologists have discovered that the wiring of our brains may indeed be more inclined to favor emotionality rather than reason. This discovery has shattered previously held theories. It may even be called a revolution in our understanding of the human brain. Although lay people seem fascinated by this new science, the use of these new discoveries is not always reflected in psychotherapy, which of late has been in a hurry to quote unquote cure people through the use of cognitive and behavioral techniques. One of the reasons that this may not work is stated by Lewis et al. Quote, while having emotions is under limbic control, speaking of them falls under the jurisdiction of the neocortex. The division of labor creates translation troubles. Unquote. Besides the fact that trauma does not lend itself to narrative, the limbic and cortical parts of the brain do not speak the same language, and as Lewis et al. Point out, the limbic brain is a slow learner. In speaking later about therapies, we will see why. It may be that Freud and others espousing analysis or long term, quote, psychodynamic, unquote, psychotherapy were onto something that the HMOs, in their haste for quick fixes, have forgotten or neglected. With depression causing the loss of billions of dollars in corporate profits, at last something to catch everyone's attention, there may be a reason for HMOs to rethink their policies. Although this new understanding of the relationship between the neurocortex and the amygdala is in its infant stage, it should not be ignored because it could answer some of the questions. Many therapists and law enforcement personnel have been asking about the relationship between childhood traumatic experiences and violent behavior and crime. Understanding the power of the amygdala to influence behavior should not be used as an excuse for traumatized people to act in an antisocial manner. Instead, any out of control behavior pattern should act as a red flag pointing to the need to seek help before their behavior becomes destructive. This warning is driven home as we see children acting out their rage and sorrow in more and more violent ways. This is the only tip of the iceberg. So far as the neurobiology is concerned, it is fairly new science with a long way to go as far as mapping the brain's activities is concerned. As mentioned earlier, the brain has an astounding 100 billion neurons, each of which in turn can interact with thousands of other neurons. This is a staggering thought and needs to temper out our conclusions about the limbic system. In an excellent article for Family Therapy Networker titled The Emotional Imperative, Brent Atkinson points out, quote, the nearly charted links between our neural bigotry and our primitive passions merit an open-minded and thoughtful response, unquote. And that article is from 1999. The mind and body can no longer be seen as separate, but as parts of the whole. Emotions, too, have to be acknowledged as valid interpreters of our world. Peart says, quote, we can no longer think of the emotions as having less validity than physical, material substances, but instead must see them as cellular signals that are involved in the process of translating the information into physical reality, literally transforming mind into matter. Emotions are at the nexus between matter and mind, going back and forth between the two and influencing both, unquote, in 1997. Emotions that are vestiges of old traumas, however, must be tempered with new information about life as it is today. Alright, that is a whole lot of... Alright. So basically, they're saying that emotions, how we interpret things, right? How we interpret information forms our emotions, right? So, that's completely valid in how you see things. When you reason, I'm trying hard to like explain this. So even if the information is wrong, your emotions are valid, right? And as you get new information and you understand more, or maybe you work out things, that can change, right? So like we were talking about, trust your gut. And it's okay to say like, hey, I was wrong, or hey, through different stages of your life, I was talking about this to someone that, or, in the last video, actually, that's what I was saying, that in different stages of your life, you may feel different about your adoption, for example, right? So, like, when I was little, I don't think I think it affected me, but it didn't, like, I didn't understand it. And then when I was, like, 6 or 7, I was, I guess, angry with my birth mom. I don't remember that part, but I've told the story that my adoptive mom told me, where I just wanted nothing to do with her. And then she disappeared. That's a whole other ball game. And then, I was looking for her off and on between the ages of 18 and 21 when I found her again. Now, I can absolutely sit here and say, oh, well, not having connections to my biological father don't bother me, but the truth of the matter is it does, right? So it's complex in my situation. I can reason out like, oh yeah, like, he was, an alcoholic, and he was a drug user, and he did all these bad things, and I really don't want a relationship with him, and, he treated my birth mother bad, and so forth, right? That's my reasoning. But my emotion still says, he's still your biological father, and you still want answers, right? I still want to know about my Apache side, right? I still want to know why he did what he did and what happened to him, right? Did he overcome it? Is he a better person? What was the family like, right? You're still gonna have questions. Now, I can still reason, being like, I may not want a relationship with him, but deep down it still affected me, right? Where, I've told this story before. When I was a kid, especially, I remember specifically around middle school, because I went to a school near Central Park, and sometimes I would go sit in Central Park and eat lunch, because we could do that. I know, the crazy days, right? Um, and sometimes I would see these gentlemen walking, and they very much looked like my adoptive father. Um, and even though I'm like rationalizing, like, oh, he's at work and like different part of the city, right? Um, it's not clicking, and the emotion of dad, 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 and like calling out, but then getting ignored bothered me. And it didn't just happen one time. Like, I will tell you, this happened so often. Now, granted, my dad looks like a very generic gentleman, um, with his, long raincoat and suit and all that, um, and his like swooping haircut, um, but it still bothered me. And I feel like, for me anyway, right, there's more for me to work on in that dynamic than there ever was when it came to my birth mom. And in part, I think having that open adoption part, even until I was 7, because like I said, there was complexities and she disappeared. And being able to look at pictures and being able now, like, I read all the emails. I had access to that back then, I just didn't remember. And seeing how trauma informed she was, as well as my birth, or as my adoptive parents, truly helped me as a child. I'm not gonna say I was the perfect child. I'm sure I wasn't. But you know I still fight those demons from my biological father's side, right? I still fight the part of me wants to drink, but then I'm afraid that if I even have a sip, I can become an alcoholic, right? And the addiction gene, even though I'm not drinking or doing drugs, it can show up through food or through obsessions and other things. There's just a lot more to it, and it's scary. It's honestly scary. Anyway, I just ranted for a while. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I will see you next time for, what are we reading tomorrow? A New Paradigm.